The classroom was so silent you could hear the fluorescent lights humming above them. 28 students sat frozen in their seats, eyes darting between their social studies teacher and the imposing man standing in the doorway. His uniform, deep navy, sharply pressed, caught the morning light and scattered it across rows of wide, stunned faces. Medals glinted like small suns on his chest. His presence seemed to change the air itself, making it heavier, denser, charged. Commander Raymond Johnson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ms. Harding," he said, stepping forward with calm, deliberate authority, "I was told you accused my son of lying about my profession." His tone wasn't loud, yet it carried through the room like distant thunder, steady, inevitable, MS. Harding's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her knuckles whitened around the edge of her desk. Just a few minutes earlier, she'd been lecturing the class about honesty and responsibility. Now, with the commander in full dress blues standing only a few feet from her, she looked suddenly, painfully small. Malik Johnson sat near the window, posture tight, shoulders stiff. He hadn't expected his father to come in uniform. He hadn't expected this moment at all. Part of him was relieved. Part of him wanted to shrink into his chair and disappear. And part of him, one he'd tried to silence since yesterday, felt something close to vindication. But Miss Harding tried to recover. Tried, for one last fleeting moment, to maintain the illusion of control. "Commander Johnson," she said with forced politeness, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. I simply encouraged Malik to choose a more realistic subject for his project." Raymond's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. "A more realistic subject," he repeated quietly. Students exchanged tense glances. Everyone could feel it. The truth was assembling itself like a storm front, and no one could outrun it. The commander stepped farther into the classroom, each footfall slow and measured. "My son told the truth, every word." Miss Harding's face paled. I wasn't sure," she stammered. "Children exaggerate sometimes." Raymond stopped directly in front of her desk. He set his hat down with the kind of precision that came from decades of discipline. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Yesterday," he said, "my son came home with a 0 on an assignment about his hero, a 0 for dishonesty. He sat at the dinner table silent, couldn't eat, couldn't look at me." His voice softened, but the softness only made the impact sharper. "Do you have any idea how that feels, to know your own child was punished for telling the truth?" Miss Harding opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Malik couldn't look away. His heart hammered in his chest. This wasn't the version of his dad the world usually saw, joking, gentle, singing off-key while flipping pancakes. This was the man who had flown through hurricanes to deliver aid, who had stood on the deck of a destroyer for 18-hour days, who had buried friends and led teams through impossible missions. And right now, every ounce of that strength was focused on defending his son. "Malik," Commander Johnson said, turning slightly, "would you stand up for a moment?" Malik rose slowly, eyes wide. Raymond placed a respectful hand on his shoulder. "Tell the class exactly what you said in your presentation." Malik swallowed. His voice came out small but steady. "I said my father is a Naval Chief of Staff, and that he's my hero." Before anyone could speak, Raymond reached into a folder tucked beneath his arm. He withdrew a single document, official, sealed, irrefutable. He laid it gently on Miss Harding's desk. "This," he said, "is my service verification, signed by the Navy." A collective gasp rippled across the room. Miss Harding's mouth hung open. And just like that, the power shifted. The woman who'd mocked a child for daring to speak the truth now found herself staring down the undeniable proof that she'd been wrong, deeply, embarrassingly wrong. The classroom silence was no longer empty. It pulsed with realization, shock, and a kind of awe. Miss Harding sank slowly into her chair, eyes glassy. I didn't know," she whispered. "That," the commander replied, "is exactly the problem." And somewhere deep inside Malik, something heavy and painful began to loosen. This moment, this confrontation, was only the beginning. The truth hadn't fully revealed itself yet. The consequences hadn't even started. But one thing was certain. Nothing in this school would ever be the same again. Before we go deeper, if you appreciate stories that take hours to craft but only seconds to enjoy, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps me keep creating these for you. Malik Johnson's life on the surface had always seemed ordinary. The kind of ordinary parents boasted about on social media. Good grades, polite manners, weekend soccer games, piano lessons, and carefully curated family photos. But beneath that ordinary exterior, Malik lived in a household shaped by structure, discipline, and quiet sacrifice. A life defined by values most children didn't fully understand until years later. Every morning, Malik rose before dawn. His mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, would already be gone, leaving a note tucked under his cereal bowl. "Make today matter." His father, Commander Raymond Johnson, returned late from classified missions that Malik could only describe to friends as Dad being a superhero. There were no stories about secret missions, no bragging about medals, no casual talk of saving the lives of strangers in distant countries. Only discipline, humility, and expectation. Malik absorbed all of it quietly. Respect, courage, honesty, and most of all, pride without arrogance. These weren't just family rules, they were a way of life. He excelled in school, but he never flaunted his achievements. In the neighborhood, he was known as polite, studious, and unassuming. Yet school was a different world entirely, a microcosm of hierarchy and authority that didn't always reward truth or fairness. At Jefferson Middle School, Ms. Harding ruled the social studies classroom with the kind of rigid control that made every word she said feel like a test. Students learned quickly. The system was her kingdom. Authority wasn't questioned, and respect was often demanded rather than earned. There had always been subtle signs that injustice lingered just beneath the surface. Malik remembered last year when he'd stayed after class to explain why a group project partner had failed to contribute. Ms. Harding dismissed him with a sharp, "Excuses don't matter. Results do." Malik had walked home feeling a knot in his chest, realizing the adult world could reward appearances over reality. He noticed patterns too: who got called out, who got praised. It wasn't always about ability. It was about fitting into expectations that weren't openly stated. The students who conformed, who laughed at the right jokes, or who never dared to speak out, flourished. The ones who dared to be honest, who tried to shine a light on facts inconvenient to authority, risked humiliation. Malik had seen it happen to others. He'd never thought it would happen to him. And then came the assignment: Community Heroes. A simple, straightforward project. Find someone in your life who inspires you and tell the class why. Malik had spent a week preparing. He drafted note cards, rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror, timed every word, practiced deep breaths. His father had just returned from a classified mission, but Malik finally felt ready to honor the man who shaped his moral compass. The morning of the presentation, Malik walked into the classroom with a calm confidence that belied the butterflies in his stomach. The room smelled faintly of chalk dust and Lysol, a smell he'd come to associate with learning. But this time, he also felt the tension of unspoken expectations. Other students fidgeted with pencils or whispered to friends, but Malik's focus was elsewhere, on the truth he wanted to deliver. "My hero is my father, Commander Raymond Johnson," he began, voice clear, unwavering. "He serves as a Naval Chief of Staff. His responsibilities include leading operations, coordinating missions, and protecting our country." He spoke of humanitarian missions, storm relief and rescue operations, all the while careful not to embellish. Each word carried pride and respect, but he did not boast. His classmates' eyes widened as he described distant countries, nights spent at sea, and lives touched by his father's work. Some whispered to each other, impressed, unsure if they had truly understood what Malik was describing. But then came Ms. Harding's response. She raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Malik," she said slowly, "that was creative, but we need to focus on reality in this classroom." The room froze. Malik blinked, confused. "Ma'am." "It's okay to admire your father," she continued, "but making up stories doesn't help your education. You could have chosen a more believable job for him." The words hit him like a cold gust of wind. He felt his cheeks burn, fingers tightening around his note cards. "I'm not lying," he said softly, though the soft voice barely reached past the rows of desks. Miss Harding crossed her arms, the classic posture of authority. "Enough. I've been teaching long enough to know when a child is exaggerating. A Naval Chief of Staff. Really, Malik, do you think I'm foolish?" Whispers flitted through the classroom. Some students looked at Malik with sympathy, others seemed uncertain, questioning what they had just heard. Malik's chest tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to speak, to shout, but he remembered his father's words: "Stay respectful, stay calm." The system had made its move. Authority, unchecked, had spoken. And for the first time, Malik felt the crushing weight of being powerless in front of a figure who could define his truth, or erase it entirely. When he sat down, the whispers continued, half apologies, half curiosity, but the damage was done. His grade, an automatic 0 for dishonesty, stared at him from the returned rubric like a scarlet letter. The incident traveled quickly. By afternoon, parents were talking, calls were made, and the principal became aware. While Malik's world was grounded in integrity, honesty, and quiet resilience, the school's system moved with bureaucratic speed to enforce the assumptions of authority, whether true or false. For Malik, life had always been about standing by values, even when unseen. But now, standing by truth meant standing against the very system designed to judge him without understanding. It was no longer a simple classroom assignment. It was a collision between integrity and an authority that refused to see it. Have you ever seen someone get mistreated simply because a powerful person assumed they were weak? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them. The next morning, Malik returned to class carrying the invisible weight of yesterday's humiliation. The hallways buzzed with whispers, punctuated by the occasional stifled laugh from a student trying to mask curiosity as humor. Each step toward Ms. Harding's classroom felt like wading through invisible currents pulling him under. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered briefly, like an omen, as Malik slid into his seat. Ms. Harding had her usual stern posture, arms crossed, expression sharpened. But there was a subtle edge of smugness today, as if yesterday's judgment had fortified her authority. "Malik," she began, voice slicing through the morning murmur, "before we continue, I want everyone to understand something. Honesty is critical, and dishonesty has consequences." She tapped her desk, punctuating the warning. "We cannot have students creating false narratives about their families." The classroom froze. A few students shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Malik with mixed emotions, some sympathetic, some hesitant. Malik clenched his fists under the desk. Every fiber of his being wanted to defend himself, to scream that the false narrative she accused him of was the absolute truth. But he remembered his father's words, echoing like a mantra: "Stay respectful. Stay calm." Ms. Harding motioned for him to stand. "Malik, I will ask again. Your father is a Naval Chief of Staff. That seems unlikely. Are you sure you're not embellishing to impress the class?" The words hit Malik like a punch. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed the rising heat in his throat. I'm sure," he said finally, voice steady but low. The teacher's gaze sharpened, scanning the room like a hawk, ensuring no one would contradict her. "Enough. You will receive a 0 for this project. Let this be a lesson to all of you about honesty." She paused, letting her words linger like smoke. "Exaggeration in school is unacceptable." A few students whispered, unsure if they should speak up. Malik's best friend Tay leaned forward, whispering, "That's not right. You told the truth, Malik." Malik gave a tiny nod, grateful but silent. Inside, Malik's chest felt like it was tightening, pressure building like storm clouds. No one in that classroom, not his peers, not Ms. Harding, knew the truth behind his father's life. No one could grasp the countless nights spent preparing for missions, the humanitarian relief flights, the meticulous coordination of operations that saved lives across the globe. To them, it sounded like fiction, a fantasy story that a child had fabricated to sound impressive. He wanted to scream, to point at Miss Harding and say, "Do you even know who my father is?" But he didn't. He had learned early that respect mattered more than instant justice, even when the injustice burned inside him. So he sat quietly, silently bearing the accusation. When the bell finally rang, Malik slumped into his chair, exhausted. The whispers and glances followed him down the hallway, and every step home felt heavier than the last. By the time he opened the door to his house, the weight of the day settled into his bones. His mother looked up from the kitchen counter, worry etched on her face. "Malik, what happened?" He explained in a low, measured voice, recounting the humiliation, the zero grade, the disbelief. His mother's jaw tightened as she listened, her hands gripping the counter. "We'll handle this," she said quietly. "Don't worry." Later that evening, the news spread faster than Malik anticipated. Parents called the school, questioning the zero. Rumors traveled like wildfire. A student punished for telling the truth about his father. Eventually, it reached the principal's office. The principal, aware of Commander Johnson's reputation and service, immediately contacted Malik's mother. Malik went to bed that night with a tight knot in his chest. He couldn't sleep, replaying the classroom scene over and over. The whispers, Miss Harding's words, the judgmental stares, each looped through his mind. But beneath the fear and frustration, a flicker of hope remained. His father would understand. His father would know the truth. The following morning, Malik arrived at school to a surreal scene. Word had already spread, and students whispered in hushed tones, but none of them could have prepared him for what happened next. Commander Raymond Johnson walked into the school in full dress blues. His posture was impeccable, every movement radiating authority and calm confidence. Medals lined his chest like constellations, each one a story of sacrifice and courage. The hallways fell silent. Students froze mid-step. Teachers instinctively straightened. Even the principal looked tense, caught between protocol and respect. Malik watched, heart thudding in his chest, as his father walked toward Miss Harding's classroom. Inside the room, Miss Harding froze at the doorway. She could not ignore the presence of someone whose authority transcended hers. She had wielded power over Malik with confidence yesterday, but now her assumptions were about to crumble. "Good morning," Commander Johnson said, voice calm but carrying an edge that demanded attention. "I'm here to discuss the accusation that my son lied about my profession." The room held its breath. Malik's classmates turned toward him, curiosity and shock etched into their faces. Some gasped quietly. Others sank into their seats, realizing for the first time that truth and authority were not always aligned. Miss Harding opened her mouth but could not speak. Words fled her, replaced by panic and recognition. She had misjudged a child. She had misjudged reality, and she knew it. Commander Johnson stepped closer, producing official documents from his folder, verification of service, mission records, commendations. He placed them on Miss Harding's desk. The shine of the paper, crisp and authoritative, seemed to illuminate the room. Malik's heart pounded in his chest. The tension in the classroom was palpable, like static electricity waiting to spark. Every student felt it. Every adult felt it. And in that moment, Malik realized something vital. The truth cannot be erased. Authority can punish, doubt, humiliate, but the truth remains, waiting for its moment. Miss Harding's voice finally escaped, trembling. I didn't know. I'm sorry." Commander Johnson's gaze remained steady, unyielding. "That is exactly the problem," he said softly, but the weight behind it struck harder than any shouted accusation. Malik swallowed, feeling a mix of relief and awe. He had endured humiliation, public doubt, and the sting of authority misused, but now the tide was turning. The system that had punished him without understanding was about to be held accountable. The morning after Commander Johnson's arrival, Malik returned to school with a strange mixture of anxiety and quiet resolve. The previous day's events had sent ripples through Jefferson Middle School, and every hallway seemed charged, every glance heavy with anticipation. Malik's friends whispered cautiously as he passed. Some teachers avoided eye contact, others murmured behind hands. The school had become a theater of tension, the stage set for confrontation, vindication, or disaster. Miss Harding, however, refused to yield. Though her face had paled the previous morning, her posture was still rigid, a mask of authority that had yet to crack fully. She arrived early, shuffling papers and muttering to herself, preparing for what she assumed would be another attempt to assert control. But the dynamics had shifted. Now, every word she spoke was measured, cautious, like a predator aware that its prey might strike. Malik's classmates watched him differently. Some approached with hesitant encouragement. Tay clapped him lightly on the shoulder, whispering, "Don't let her get to you. She's scared now." But even as Malik nodded, he felt a swell of pressure. The zero on his assignment still hung over him like a shadow, and the whispers in the cafeteria were not entirely supportive. A few students still questioned whether Malik had blown things out of proportion. The injustice had already embedded itself in the school social fabric. Malik had always been a quiet observer, but now he had to navigate the storm that his father's presence had begun to stir. Each conversation, each glance, felt like walking on a tightrope. The system, Ms. Harding, the authority of the classroom, the weight of institutional norms, was working actively to reassert itself, to protect its credibility. They would not admit wrongdoing easily. The spark that had ignited the conflict became a slow-burning tension throughout the week. Teachers whispered in the staff room about Malik's family influence, some with envy, others with caution. Students debated quietly among themselves, unsure how to reconcile the image of Malik, the polite, unassuming boy, with the stark presence of his father, whose accomplishments and rank cast shadows over everyone else. Malik found himself in a new, precarious position. He had to maintain dignity while the world tested his composure. When Ms. Harding asked him to read a passage aloud in class, he did so with careful, steady precision, making no unnecessary movement, no sign of the turmoil he felt. Yet he noticed the subtle smirks, the quick glances exchanged between her and a few other staff members. It was as though they were testing him, waiting for the moment he might falter, hopping to reassert control. At home, Malik's father and mother strategized quietly. "The most important thing," Commander Johnson said one evening as they sat in the living room surrounded by books and papers, "is that you do not let their doubt define your truth. They can punish grades, punish perception, but they cannot punish facts. Stay calm. Stay patient. Let the truth reveal itself in time." Malik listened intently, absorbing the weight of his father's words. The house felt heavy with anticipation, as though even the walls knew what was coming. He replayed the moment in the classroom, Miss Harding's sharp tone, the sting of public judgment, the zero emblazoned in red on his paper. Each memory strengthened his resolve. He could not retreat. The tipping point arrived midweek. A meeting was called by the principal, ostensibly to review standard classroom procedures. But Malik knew the truth. The school administration could no longer ignore the storm gathering around him. Parents had called, conversations had been logged, whispers had become questions demanding answers. The system that had seemed immovable now quivered, teetering on the brink of exposure. In the meeting, Ms. Harding repeated her accusations cautiously, attempting to frame Malik's honesty as exaggeration. But when confronted with the official verification of Commander Johnson's service record, her defenses began to crumble. The principal, once neutral, leaned back in his chair, reviewing the documentation with a slow, deliberate attention. Malik sat quietly in the corner, his hands folded, heart racing. He was no longer fighting alone. The facts themselves were his allies. Yet the system did not relent easily. Ms. Harding continued to push, questioning minor details, testing the limits of credibility. Every word she uttered was a reminder of how deeply entrenched authority could resist truth. Malik felt the walls closing in again, the whispers, the doubt, the subtle attacks, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. He had learned the power of composure, of patience, of waiting for the moment when the scales would tip. Every day felt like a countdown. The tension in the school was palpable. Students whispered nervously, unsure whether Malik would triumph or be forced to endure further humiliation. Each encounter with Ms. Harding was a high-wire act, every misstep potentially fatal to his reputation. He walked the halls like a soldier on a mission, every step deliberate, every interaction measured. And then came the moment of near despair. During a social studies group activity, Ms. Harding interrupted Malik repeatedly, questioning his input and challenging facts he had verified. Several classmates avoided eye contact, unsure whether to intervene. Malik felt the familiar heat of frustration rising but forced himself to breathe, to remain steady. He recalled his father's words, "The truth is patient. It will reveal itself." By the end of the week, the school had reached a breaking point. Calls from parents, whispers of local media attention, and the unmistakable presence of a man whose service and authority could not be disputed had created a perfect storm. Malik's resolve, tested continuously, had held. He had maintained dignity, composure, and faith in the facts. In that climactic moment, Malik realized something profound. Truth was not just a passive quality. It required courage, patience, and endurance against forces that sought to obscure it. And he, a 12-year-old boy, had endured the pressure with the poise of someone much older. The stage was set. The confrontation that would restore justice and recalibrate the balance of power was imminent. The tension in the school was no longer theoretical. It was alive, tangible, ready to explode into revelation. The morning air at Jefferson Middle School carried a strange stillness, a tension so thick it felt almost physical. Students whispered in hushed tones, teachers lingered in the hallways, and the principal's office seemed busier than usual. Everyone knew something monumental was about to happen, though no one could say exactly what. Malik Johnson walked to class with steady steps, the weight of the past week pressing on him but not breaking him. Each footfall echoed in his mind like a drumbeat: patience, composure, truth. The zero on his assignment had been a constant shadow, but he had learned to carry it with dignity. Today, that shadow would finally dissolve. When he entered the classroom, the scene that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Commander Raymond Johnson stood by the doorway, full dress blues immaculate, medals catching the morning sunlight filtering through the blinds. His posture radiated calm authority, yet every movement carried an undeniable gravity. Ms. Harding sat at her desk, papers neatly stacked, but her usual air of superiority was gone. She looked small and fragile under the weight of what she was about to face. Her fingers tapped nervously against the desktop, her eyes darting between Malik and the man who could not be dismissed. The room fell silent, every student and teacher holding their breath. Malik felt the electricity in the air, the kind that precedes a storm breaking. He stood by his desk, hands at his sides, pulse steady, heart hammering in his chest. Commander Johnson spoke first, his voice calm, deliberate, and unshakable. "Good morning. I am here to address a serious matter regarding my son's project and the accusations made about his honesty." He paused, letting his presence settle over the room like a tangible force. "It has come to my attention that Malik was penalized for allegedly exaggerating the truth about my profession. That accusation is false." He moved closer to Ms. Harding's desk, placing a folder with official documents in front of her. Each page gleamed with the authority of truth: service records, commendations, and verified mission logs. The documentation left no room for doubt. "Every word my son spoke in his presentation was factual," Commander Johnson continued. "He described my duties, missions, and humanitarian work accurately. I can attest to this personally and officially." Ms. Harding's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in the classroom, she was utterly silent, stripped of the pretense of control she had wielded with such confidence the previous week. Malik watched the shift in the room. The power dynamics that had humiliated him, forced him into silence, and allowed authority to dismiss the truth, now crumbled. He felt a swell of relief, but it was tempered with awe. His father's presence, combined with the irrefutable facts, had overturned what had seemed like an insurmountable injustice. One by one, students began to whisper, their voices hushed but growing in volume. Some looked at Miss Harding with newfound understanding, others at Malik with admiration. The air in the room seemed charged with recognition. The truth, long ignored, had finally been vindicated. Miss Harding's face drained of color. She opened her mouth again, finally producing a weak, trembling response. I didn't realize. Her usual authority and certainty had evaporated, leaving only embarrassment and guilt. Commander Johnson's gaze remained steady, unyielding. "That is exactly the problem," he said softly, but each word hit with undeniable force. "Assumptions about children, their honesty, and their families have consequences. Authority without understanding can harm, misjudge, and destroy confidence." The silence stretched, thick with tension. Malik's classmates watched the unfolding scene, the reversal of power, and the unmasking of injustice. Some had never witnessed such a public demonstration of authority held accountable. Others felt the validation of truth, the thrill of seeing integrity triumph over presumption. Malik himself felt a flood of emotions: relief, vindication, pride, and a quiet satisfaction. The humiliation of the past week, the whispers, the zero grade, the stifled desire to defend himself, all of it had been confronted and overturned. The classroom, once a stage of injustice, was now a space of acknowledgement. The principal stepped forward, nodding to Commander Johnson. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Malik's project and honesty will be fully recognized, and appropriate corrections will be made immediately." Malik's eyes met his father's. Commander Johnson offered a small, reassuring smile, a silent acknowledgement of endurance, patience, and the courage to remain composed under fire. Malik's chest swelled with gratitude and pride, not only for the vindication, but for the lesson in perseverance his father had exemplified. Miss Harding, still seated, lowered her gaze. The authority she had wielded carelessly was gone. Her mistake had been exposed not by confrontation or argument, but by patience, truth, and undeniable evidence. The reversal was complete. The zero on Malik's project would be erased and his credibility restored, publicly, formally, irrevocably. For the students, the lesson was clear. Power can intimidate, rules can punish, and authority can be misused. But the truth, when upheld with patience and integrity, cannot be denied. It emerges inevitably, demanding recognition and respect. Malik returned to his desk, finally free to breathe fully. His classmates offered quiet nods and murmured congratulations. Tay leaned over, whispering with a grin, "You handled that better than anyone could." Malik smiled faintly, a mix of exhaustion and triumph settling over him. The classroom, once a place of embarrassment and suppression, had been transformed into a testament to courage and justice. Malik's story, his honesty, and his father's unwavering support had shifted the balance of power, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. The aftermath of the revelation rippled through Jefferson Middle School like a storm settling into calm. Malik Johnson walked the halls with a sense of quiet relief. The weight of false accusation finally lifted. Teachers who had once whispered in staff rooms about the Johnson boy now regarded him with respect, if not a hint of awe. Students approached him cautiously at first, then with genuine congratulations, recognizing that the humility and patience he had displayed under pressure were extraordinary for someone his age. Ms. Harding, meanwhile, faced consequences she could no longer avoid. The principal requested a private meeting, where the errors in judgment, the biased assumptions, and the mishandling of Malik's assignment were documented formally. A written reprimand was placed in her file, mandating a professional development program on unconscious bias and classroom fairness. While no punitive action could erase her embarrassment, the formal recognition of her misjudgment ensured accountability. The school also took steps to prevent similar incidents in the future. Policies were revised to include verification procedures for disputes involving student work and grading. Teachers were reminded that authority does not grant infallibility, and that assumptions about a student's honesty could have lasting consequences. Posters highlighting fairness, integrity, and respect were placed in hallways, a subtle but meaningful reminder that truth matters, regardless of rank, appearance, or preconception. Malik's 0 on the assignment was officially changed to reflect his factual presentation, and a school-wide acknowledgement celebrated the accuracy and thoughtfulness of his work. During the next assembly, the principal praised Malik for his composure, patience, and courage in the face of unjust criticism. The applause that followed echoed across the gymnasium, affirming not only Malik's personal victory but a broader lesson about truth and integrity. Commander Raymond Johnson remained a steady presence, a quiet guardian behind the scenes. He did not seek public attention or accolades. His involvement had been measured, professional, and entirely about upholding his son's right to honesty. Yet students and staff could not ignore the lessons implicit in his conduct: the power of dignity, authority tempered by fairness, and the courage to confront injustice without aggression. Malik himself grew in ways subtle but profound. The ordeal had tested him emotionally, morally, and socially. He had learned that respect does not always guarantee protection, that authority can be flawed, and that courage sometimes means enduring humiliation quietly while waiting for the truth to reveal itself. He became more introspective, more aware of the power dynamics around him, and more committed to integrity, both in and out of the classroom. Socially, Malik noticed a change in the interactions around him. Students who had previously doubted him now sought his counsel or simply treated him with renewed respect. Teachers were more careful with assumptions, and Ms. Harding's demeanor towards students shifted noticeably. Her confidence remained, but it was tempered by an awareness of her own fallibility. The classroom environment became more attentive to fairness, curiosity, and validation of student voices, fostering a culture where students felt safer speaking honestly. Even parents noticed a difference. Conversations at school events and on the playground often circled back to Malik's story, with adults praising his patience and integrity. The story became a quiet legend in the community, a reminder that even a single act of injustice, when confronted with truth and composure, can catalyze systemic change. Malik's home life, too, reflected subtle transformations. His father remained the guiding figure, yet Malik found himself more confident in conversations, more willing to articulate principles and stand by facts in discussions with peers and adults alike. The ordeal had instilled a sense of empowerment, rooted not in authority or intimidation, but in the unshakable value of honesty. Through all this, Malik never sought revenge or vindication for its own sake. The lesson was bigger than personal triumph. It was about the system recognizing its own flaws, about authority learning humility, and about the ripple effects of integrity across a community. He realized that justice, when earned patiently and rooted in truth, had a resonance far deeper than momentary satisfaction. By the end of the semester, Jefferson Middle School bore subtle but enduring marks of change. Policies, interactions, and even the way students approached their presentations reflected the lasting impact of Malik's experience. The 0 that had once symbolized injustice was now a relic of a moment transformed into collective learning. Malik walked the halls with a quiet confidence. He carried no arrogance, only awareness, a recognition that justice is neither instantaneous nor guaranteed, but achievable through patience, integrity, and courage. He had faced public doubt, systemic power, and humiliation, yet emerged stronger, more principled, and more resilient. By the time the school year drew to a close, Malik Johnson's story had become more than a personal triumph. It had become a quiet emblem of truth, justice, and the power of patience. Students whispered about the boy who had stood firm in the face of authority, teachers reflected on the fragility of assumptions, and parents shared the lesson at kitchen tables and community gatherings. Integrity cannot be fabricated, and it cannot be silenced. Malik himself carried the experience not as a scar but as a quiet strength. He had learned firsthand that authority, no matter how imposing, could falter in the face of facts and dignity. He had felt the sting of public doubt, the tension of whispered rumors, and the weight of an unjust grade, but he had endured. In doing so, he discovered something deeper. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is calm, patient, and steady, like a beacon that waits for the storm to pass before shining brightly. His father, Commander Raymond Johnson, never made a spectacle of the ordeal. To him, the lesson was clear. Integrity is earned and upheld in small, consistent acts of respect, humility, and perseverance. Malik's life had been shaped not by medals or accolades, but by the invisible scaffolding of patience, discipline, and moral fortitude. And now, for the first time, the broader world of his school had witnessed the same principle in action. Even Ms. Harding, though humbled, became part of the larger lesson. Her misjudgment had exposed systemic flaws in the classroom, but her acknowledgement of error allowed the system itself to grow stronger. The incident reminded everyone that authority is not inherently infallible, and that accountability, when paired with guidance, can lead to meaningful reform rather than mere punishment. The classroom, once a battleground of whispers and suspicion, had transformed into a place where honesty was not just encouraged, but expected. Students learned to approach their work with care, to speak truthfully, and to trust that integrity would ultimately be recognized. Malik's journey illustrated the subtle but profound reality. The impact of standing by truth stretches far beyond individual vindication. It reshapes communities, influences cultures, and leaves an enduring mark on those who witness it. As Malik walked home one evening, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the street, he felt a sense of quiet completion. The storm had passed. The injustice had been addressed. The lessons had been learned, not only by him, but by every adult and child who had been part of the ordeal. He glanced at his reflection in the window of a closed shop and smiled faintly. The boy who had endured humiliation, who had been doubted and punished, now carried the quiet power of truth and patience. And that ultimately was the most enduring lesson, that justice is neither instantaneous nor guaranteed, but it is always worth the wait. That truth, no matter how challenged, cannot be erased, and that courage, even in the smallest of hearts, can change the world. If stories like this remind you that truth still matters, please subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you know.